The director yelled, "Cut!" for the 12th time that afternoon, and Dean Martin's face didn't change at all. But Marlon Brando folded his arms in the shadows backstage, and that look, that particular tightening around his eyes, said everything was about to break open, all the things Dean had been hiding for 20 years. Wait, because what Marlon said to Dean during lunch break wasn't just a challenge, and what Dean did the next morning in front of those cameras made Hollywood never look at him the same way again, but almost nobody understood what it cost him. It was March 1958, and the soundstage at 20th Century Fox felt like a pressure cooker. The Young Lions had been shooting for 5 weeks. A World War II drama, serious, heavy, the kind of film that demanded everything from its actors. Marlon Brando was playing a German officer wrestling with conscience. Montgomery Clift was playing a Jewish soldier facing anti-Semitism, and Dean Martin was playing a Broadway entertainer turned reluctant soldier, trying to prove he wasn't just the guy who sang songs with a drink in his hand. Edward Damatrick, the director, sat in his canvas chair with his hand over his mouth, watching Dean work through the scene again. It was a simple moment on paper. Dean's character receives a letter. His best friend has been killed in combat. He reads it alone in a barracks. He breaks down. Take 12. Dean opened the prop letter, his hands steady. He read the words silently, his face registering shock, then grief. His eyes grew wet. His jaw tightened. He sat down slowly on the bunk. The performance was good, technically correct. Every beat hit, but something was missing. "Cut," Dimitrick said quietly. He stood up, walked to Dean. "That was better, much better. But I need more. I need to believe you're destroyed. Right now, I believe you're sad." "There's a difference." Dean nodded, his expression unchanged. That easy smile nowhere near his face, but somehow still present in the set of his shoulders, the looseness of his posture. "What do you want me to do differently?" "I don't know," Dimitrick said honestly. "That's what you have to figure out. We'll break for lunch. Think about it. We'll go again at 2. The crew scattered. Dean walked off the set toward his dressing room, and Marlon Brando, who'd been watching from behind the camera for the last hour, followed him. Dean heard footsteps behind him in the narrow corridor between sound stages. He turned. Marlon was there, hands in his pockets, that intense focus in his eyes that everyone on set had learned to recognize. Marlon Brando was famous for his method acting approach, diving deep into characters, living their emotions as if they were his own. When Marlon looked at you like that, he was seeing something you probably didn't want seen. "Can we talk?" Marlon asked. "Sure." Dean kept walking. Marlon fell into step beside him. They ended up in an empty set room, a false bedroom constructed for a film that had wrapped weeks ago. Marlon closed the door. The soundstage was quiet around them, just the distant hum of ventilation and muffled voices from other productions. Marlon sat on the edge of the fake bed. Dean leaned against the false wall, arms crossed. "You're good," Marlon said without preamble. "Better than people give you credit for." "Thanks." Dean's voice was neutral. "But you're not an actor." The words hung there. Dean's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes, gone so fast you'd miss it if you weren't watching carefully. Marlon was watching carefully. "Is that right?" Dean said. Not a question. "You're a singer hiding behind a mask," Marlon continued. "The whole I don't care routine, the jokes, the drinks, the easy smile, it's a performance. Sure, a really good one, but it's not acting. Acting requires you to drop the mask. You've never done that. Not once. Not in any film I've seen you in. And not in that scene just now." Dean was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was careful, controlled. "What do you want from me, Marlon? I want to see if you can do it. Really do it. Drop the protection and show us something real." Marlon leaned forward. "Tomorrow morning, scene 28, the letter scene. 1 take." No jokes before, no charm after. Just you, the camera, and whatever you're actually feeling. Can you do that? You think I can't? I think you won't, Marlon said. I think you're so used to keeping everyone at arm's length that you've forgotten how to let anyone close, including yourself. I think if I asked you to cry real tears on camera, you'd find a way to make it look real without ever actually feeling anything. Dean pushed off the wall, his posture shifting, something tightening in his chest. That's quite an analysis. It's not analysis, it's observation. Marlon stood up. Every great actor I know has one thing in common. They're willing to bleed. They'll rip themselves open if that's what the scene needs. You won't. You keep everything neat, controlled, safe. That's not art, Dean. That's survival. The word landed like a slap. Survival. Because that's exactly what it was, what it had always been. And somehow Marlon had seen it in 5 weeks of working together, seen through 20 years of careful construction. Dean felt his jaw tighten. So what's your challenge? Tomorrow morning, scene 28. Show me I'm wrong. Show me you can actually feel something, and let us see it. No technique, no tricks, just truth. Marlon walked to the door, paused with his hand on the knob. Or don't. Keep doing what you're doing. You'll have a nice career, make good money, everyone will like you. But you'll never be great, and I think some part of you knows that. Marlon left. The door closed with a soft click. Dean stood alone in the fake bedroom, his reflection barely visible in a prop mirror on the false wall. He looked at himself and felt something he rarely allowed himself to feel: anger. Not at Marlon, at himself. Because Marlon was right. Notice something important here. This wasn't the first time someone had challenged Dean. Producers had pushed him towards serious roles. Directors had asked for more depth. Critics had hinted that his talents were wasted on light comedy. But Marlon was different. Marlon had named the thing Dean never spoke about: the mask, the survival mechanism, the distance between who Dean was and who he showed the world. And Marlon had made it a dare. Can you drop the mask? I doubt it. Dean left the studio at 4 that afternoon. He drove home in silence. No radio, no singing under his breath like he usually did. He lived alone then, between marriages, a house in the Hollywood Hills that felt too big and too quiet. He poured a drink, stood at the window watching the city lights come on as dusk fell. He thought about Steubenville, Ohio. He thought about being a kid who wanted to perform, who loved music and movement and making people smile. He thought about his father, Gaetano, working at the barber shop, coming home exhausted, looking at young Dean with a mixture of love and disappointment. You're a dreamer, his father used to say. Dreams don't pay bills. He thought about his older brother, Bill, who died at 17 from meningitis when Dean was only 12. He'd stood at the funeral dry-eyed while his mother sobbed, and his father aged 10 years in a single afternoon. Dean had learned something that day. If you don't let yourself feel it, it can't destroy you. He'd built his entire life on that principle. Stay light, stay charming. Never let them see you need anything. Never let them see you hurt. It had worked. It had gotten him out of Steubenville, out of poverty, out of being just another Italian kid with no future. It had made him famous, successful, safe. But Marlon was asking him to tear it all down for a single scene. Dean didn't sleep that night. He sat at his kitchen table with the script open to scene 28. He read the letter his character receives. He thought about Bill, about the funeral, about being 12 years old and deciding that feeling nothing was better than feeling everything. Around 3 in the morning, he did something he'd never done before. He let himself remember that day. Really remember it. Not the edited version he usually allowed himself. The one where he was sad but okay. The one where he'd moved on. The real version, where he'd wanted to scream, where he'd wanted to hit something, where he'd wanted his brother back so badly, it felt like his chest was caving in. He sat at that kitchen table and cried. For the first time in 30 years, Dean Martin cried about his brother's death. When he arrived at the studio at 6:30 the next morning, his eyes were red. He'd splashed cold water on his face, but it hadn't helped much. He went straight to makeup. The woman there, Gloria, took one look at him and didn't ask questions. She did her job silently, covering what she could, leaving the rest, because sometimes exhaustion is what the scene needs. Marlon was already on set, drinking coffee, talking quietly with Demetric. He saw Dean arrive. Their eyes met across the soundstage. Marlon nodded once. Dean didn't respond. At 7:45, Demetric called everyone to positions. We're shooting scene 28. Dean's solo. One take, see what we get. Dean walked onto the set, the barracks interior they'd built. The prop letter was waiting on the small table. The lighting was set. The camera was ready. Demetric looked at Dean. You okay? Yeah. Dean's voice was rough. Okay, let's go. Quiet on set. Demetric sat down. Speed. Camera. Action. Dean stood for a moment, centering himself. Then he walked to the table, picked up the letter. The envelope was already open. The letter inside. He pulled it out. The prop department had typed it. A form letter from the War Department expressing regret at the loss of Private Michael Rossini, killed in action. Dean read it. His hands started to shake. Not a performance choice. An actual physical response he couldn't control. The paper trembled. His breathing changed, became shallower, faster. His eyes filled with tears, real ones, spilling over before he could stop them, even if he'd wanted to. He tried to read the rest of the letter, but couldn't focus on the words. The paper slipped from his fingers, fell to the floor. Dean stood there, swaying slightly, and then he sat down hard on the bunk like his legs had given out. He put his head in his hands, and his shoulders shook. The crying wasn't neat. It wasn't cinematic. It was ugly and raw and desperate. The sound of it filled the soundstage, this awful gasping sob that Dean couldn't control and didn't try to. He was gone, completely lost in the grief, not for a fictional character's fictional friend, but for Bill, for 30 years of never letting himself break, for every moment he'd smiled when he wanted to scream. The crew stood frozen. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Even the camera operator, a veteran who'd shot hundreds of emotional scenes, found his own eyes stinging. Demetric didn't call cut. He let it run. Let Dean work through it. The scene called for about 45 seconds of reaction. Dean gave them 2.5 minutes of the most honest pain anyone on that soundstage had ever witnessed. Finally, Dean's breathing slowed. He lifted his head. His face was destroyed. Makeup streaked, eyes swollen. He looked directly at the camera for just a second, and in that look was everything. The exhaustion, the release, the cost of finally letting go. Cut, Demetric said softly. Silence. Complete silence on the soundstage for maybe 5 seconds. Then someone started clapping. Then everyone was clapping. The entire crew, applauding like they'd just witnessed something historic, which they had. Dean stood up slowly, wiped his face with his hands, started to walk off set. Marlon was there, standing at the edge of the lights. He caught Dean's arm gently. Dean stopped, looked at him. That's acting, Marlon said quietly. That's what I wanted to see. Dean nodded. Couldn't speak. Didn't trust his voice. He walked past Marlon toward his dressing room. Wait, because what happened next is the part that matters most, the part that explains why this moment became legend among the people who were there. 2 hours later, Dean was sitting in his dressing room, showered, changed, staring at nothing. There was a knock. He didn't answer. The door opened anyway. Marlon, can I come in? Dean shrugged. Marlon closed the door behind him, pulled up a chair, sat facing Dean. I owe you an apology, Marlon said. Dean looked at him. For what? You were right. I was right about the mask. I was wrong about why you wear it. Marlon leaned forward. I thought you were lazy. I thought you were coasting on charm because real work scared you. But that's not it, is it? Dean was quiet. You wear the mask because what's underneath is too painful, Marlon continued. You learned a long time ago that if you let yourself feel things, really feel them, it would destroy you. So you built this persona, this easygoing guy who doesn't care about anything too much. It's not laziness. It's self-preservation. Dean's throat tightened. What's your point? My point is, I do the same thing. Marlon's voice was rough. Just in reverse. I dive into every emotion. I live in every character. I make myself bleed for every scene. And I thought that made me brave. But it's not brave. It's the same fear you have. I'm just hiding in the opposite direction. Dean frowned. I don't follow. You stay detached so nothing can hurt you. I stay immersed so I never have to be myself. We're both running, Dean, just on different treadmills. Marlon rubbed his face. I've spent my entire career believing that my way was the only way, that suffering for your art is nobility. But watching you this morning, I realized something. You gave more in that one take than I've given in any 10 performances, because it wasn't technique, it wasn't method, it was just you, finally being honest. The two men sat in that small dressing room, and something shifted between them. The competitive edge dissolved. The judgment fell away. What remained was recognition. Two men who'd spent their lives protecting themselves, just in different ways, seeing each other clearly for the first time. Can I tell you something? Dean asked. Please. I'm terrified right now. Dean's voice was barely above a whisper. What I did this morning, dropping the mask like that, it's the scariest thing I've ever done, because now everyone knows I'm not who I pretend to be. They saw me break. They saw me weak. They saw you human, Marlon corrected. There's a difference. Weak is putting up walls so thick nobody can reach you. Strong is letting those walls down even though it terrifies you. Then why do you do it the other way? Dean challenged. Why do you dive into characters instead of being yourself? Marlon was quiet for a long time. Because I don't like myself very much. If I'm always being someone else, I never have to face that. The honesty of it, the rawness, hit Dean hard. He'd spent years thinking of Marlon as arrogant, self-assured, the king of method acting who looked down on everyone else's approach. But here, in this moment, Marlon was as lost as Dean had ever been. So what do we do? Dean asked. Keep running? I don't know. Marlon smiled slightly. But maybe we run a little slower. Maybe we stop pretending we have all the answers. They sat together in that dressing room for another hour, trading stories. Marlon talked about his childhood, about never feeling good enough, about using acting as a way to become anyone except himself. Dean talked about Steubenville, about Bill's death, about the moment he decided feelings were dangerous. By the time Marlon left, something had changed. Not fixed, not solved, but changed. Two men who'd entered that conversation as rivals left it as something closer to friends. The rest of the Young Lions shoot was different. Dean was more present, more willing to try things that scared him. Marlon was slightly less intense, more willing to find moments of lightness in his performance. The film, when it was released later that year, was praised. Dean's performance was called a revelation. Critics who dismissed him as a lightweight crooner suddenly saw him as a serious actor. Remember this, because it matters for what comes later. That single morning, that one take, changed how Hollywood saw Dean Martin. But more importantly, it changed how Dean saw himself. Listen to what happened 15 years later. It was 1973. Dean had his own television variety show, The Dean Martin Show, one of the most popular programs on television. His guests ranged from comedy legends to music stars to serious actors. In October of that year, Marlon Brando agreed to appear. The taping was loose, fun, the kind of easy conversation that Dean had perfected over years of television. They traded jokes about their time on The Young Lions. They sang a duet, badly and hilariously. The audience loved it. But toward the end of the show, during a quieter moment, Marlon went off script. He turned to Dean, his expression suddenly serious. "Can I tell you something?" Marlon asked. Dean, sensing the shift in tone, nodded. "Sure. In 1958, on the set of The Young Lions, I told you that you weren't an actor, that you were hiding behind a mask." Marlon looked directly at Dean. "I want to say, on national television, that I was wrong. You're one of the finest actors I've ever worked with. Because what you did that day, dropping every defense and showing us the truth, that's harder than anything I've ever done. I've spent my whole career hiding in characters. You stopped hiding. That takes more courage than I understood at the time." The studio audience was quiet, sensing they were witnessing something real in the middle of a variety show designed to be light entertainment. Dean's eyes were bright, emotional. "You didn't let me finish that day," Dean said, his voice rough. "You apologized backstage. You told me we were both running. That helped me more than you know." "You changed how I act," Marlon said. "After working with you, I started asking myself if I was being honest or just being clever. You made me want to be braver." The moment hung there, two men in their mid-50s looking at each other across 15 years of life and work and growth, acknowledging something that couldn't quite be put into words. The show cut to commercial. Backstage afterward, Marlon found Dean in his dressing room. They hugged, brief and fierce. "Thank you," Dean said, "for pushing me that day." "Thank you for being strong enough to break," Marlon replied. "Here's what almost nobody knows. That scene Dean shot in 1958, the letter scene in The Young Lions, became required viewing in acting classes for decades. Teachers showed it to students as an example of pure, unfiltered truth on camera, but they never knew the story behind it. They never knew about Marlon's challenge, about Dean's sleepless night, about the 30 years of grief he'd finally allowed himself to feel. And Dean never told them, because for all his growth, for all his willingness to be vulnerable in that one moment, he kept most of himself private. The mask didn't disappear. It just became less necessary. He learned to take it off when it mattered, then put it back on when he needed protection. That's the thing about survival mechanisms. You don't just abandon them because someone challenges you. You learn when to use them and when to set them aside. Dean learned that lesson. Marlon did too. If you enjoyed spending this time here, I'd be grateful if you'd consider subscribing. A simple like also helps more than you'd think. Marlon Brando died in 2004. Dean Martin had passed away in 1995. But their influence on acting, on the craft, on the understanding that there are multiple paths to truth continues. Every actor who struggles between technique and feeling, between protection and vulnerability, is walking the same tightrope Dean and Marlon walked. The greatest performance of Dean Martin's career lasted less than 3 minutes. It was shot in one take on a Tuesday morning in March 1958. It was never meant to be historic. It was just one man, finally brave enough to let 30 years of pain show on his face, and it changed everything. For him, for Marlon, for everyone who saw it and recognized their own fear reflected back. Sometimes the hardest thing we ever do is stop pretending we're okay. Dean Martin learned that in a fake barracks on a Hollywood soundstage, challenged by a man who saw through his mask and dared him to take it off. And when he finally did, when he finally let himself break, he didn't fall apart. He became whole. That's what Marlon understood that day, watching from the shadows. Strength isn't keeping it together. Strength is having the courage to fall apart in front of witnesses and trust that you'll survive it. Dean survived. More than survived. He proved that vulnerability isn't weakness. It's the only path to truth. And if you ever doubt whether you can drop your own mask, remember that morning in 1958. Remember Dean Martin shaking hands and honest tears. Remember that everyone who watched him break came away changed, because real courage isn't never being afraid. It's being terrified and doing it anyway. That's the lesson. That's what Marlon was really challenging Dean to learn. And Dean, after 30 years of running from his own grief, finally stood still and let it catch him. And in that moment of stillness, in that choice to stop hiding, he became unforgettable.